In the frigid silence of dawn, Skildheim village awakened to a stifled scream. Black smoke rose from the nearby woods where a fire burned beneath the trembling starlight. At its center stood a bound child, pure eyes wide with terror, shivering before elders who murmured ancient words, sacrificing innocence to appease wrathful gods. Then a shadow emerged from the mist. Gunnhild Vargdottir, the strong-armed widow, stepped into the sacred circle. Her voice shattered the silence. "Not here, not like this." Shock spread like wildfire, and no one could imagine the price she would pay that night. 24 hours earlier, frost crunched beneath Gunnhild's boots as she walked through the village with firm steps, though loneliness constricted her chest like an iron band. At 35, her face was etched with the harsh lines of a woman who had survived when many hadn't. The bitter wind carried memories of her husband, Thorwald Ironarm, fallen 3 winters past during the last Saxon invasion. His absence haunted every corner of their home, though she had long since stopped expecting to see his shadow by the hearth when she returned each evening. The village of Skildheim huddled against the mountainside like a beast seeking shelter from winter's fury. Smoke curled from low wooden longhouses, their dragon-carved posts standing sentinel against evil spirits. Children, too few after the last fever season, chased each other between buildings, their laughter a rare brightness in these dark days. Gunnhild watched them with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow. Her own womb had remained empty during her marriage, a private grief she carried silently beneath her stoic exterior. The forge awaits Gunnhild, called Brenna, a leather worker whose husband had sailed with Thorwald and never returned. The 2 widows shared a silent understanding, a bond forged in shared loss. The war preparations leave no hands idle.
"Nor should they," Gunnhild replied, adjusting the wolf pelt draped across her shoulders. Her role as the village's secondary blacksmith had been Thorvald's final gift, teaching her the secrets of metal and flame before he marched to his death. The men accepted her skill, if reluctantly. In times of war, practicality overcame tradition. As she worked the bellows that afternoon, sweat beading despite the cold, she felt the stares. Youngvild, wife of Thorgrim, whispered to her companions as they passed, their eyes sliding away when Gunnhild met their gaze. She knew what they said, that a proper widow should have remarried, or at least lived under a brother's protection, that her independence was unseemly, that perhaps she practiced Seithir, women's magic, in the privacy of her home. These whispers followed her like shadows, but she had learned to live among them. The sky darkened early, as it always did during the deep winter months. Gunnhild finished repairing a damaged shield rim, her muscles aching pleasantly from honest work. She doused the forge and gathered her tools, pausing to trace the rune tattooed on her right wrist, Thorvald's protection mark, needled into her skin on their wedding night. Sometimes she swore it warmed at her touch, though she knew better than to speak of such things. The wind shifted as she walked home, bringing with it the scent of ceremonial herbs burning. The council must be meeting, she thought, though no one had announced a gathering. The midwinter sacrifice was still a fortnight away. Curious, she changed her path, moving toward the sacred grove, where the ancient stone altar stood among gnarled oak trees that had witnessed centuries of offerings. That's when she heard it, a sound so faint she might have missed it had the wind not died momentarily. A whimper, high and frightened, like a wounded animal, or a child. Gunnhild froze, her breath suspended in the frigid air. Again it came, unmistakable this time. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her deeper into the woods, toward the sound. The ceremonial clearing appeared between the trees, illuminated by a small fire. 5 figures stood with their backs to her. She recognized Thorgrim's stooped posture and white hair immediately. The others were council members, their faces solemn in the flickering light. And there, bound to the ancient sacrifice post, was a child. A girl, no more than 8 winters old, her thin arms secured with rough rope that had already chafed her wrists raw. Her pale face was streaked with dirt and tears, but what struck Gunnhild was the defiance in those blue eyes, even as her small body trembled with cold and fear. Around her neck hung a bone pendant carved with unfamiliar runes, not of their clan. "The omens are clear," Thorgrim was saying, his breath clouding before him. 3 failed hunts, the sickness taking our youngest, the dreams of blood snow. The gods demand appeasement before they will grant us victory against the mountain clans. "A child sacrifice has not been performed in 2 generations," said Jorunn, the oldest woman on the council. Her withered hand clutched her walking stick. "Are we certain this is what they ask?" "The runes have spoken," Thorgrim replied, holding up carved stones. "And she is not of our blood. A daughter of Ulfric Gudmundsson's clan, captured during their failed raid 3 days past. Her life for our survival." Gunnhild's blood turned to ice. The Gudmundssons were indeed their enemies, raiders from the eastern fjords, who had disputed their hunting grounds for generations. But this child, this small, defiant creature, had committed no crime. Thorgrim raised a ceremonial knife, its blade catching the firelight. "We offer this blood to you, Odin Allfather, that you might turn your gaze favorably upon our warriors." The girl did not scream. She raised her chin, though tears streamed down her face. Something in that gesture broke something in Gunnhild's chest, a barrier she hadn't known existed. Before she could consider the consequences, she stepped from the shadows. "Not here," she said, her voice steady despite the thunder of her heart. "Not like this." The elders whirled, shock etched on their weathered faces. Thorgrim's eyes narrowed dangerously. "This is not your concern, Gunnhild Vargdottir," he said, his voice like stone grinding against stone. "Return to your forge and your solitude." "A child's sacrifice?" She stepped closer, feeling strangely calm despite the treason of her words. "Have we become so fearful that we spill innocent blood? What warriors are we, protecting, who would hide behind a child's death?" "She is enemy-born," growled Sten, a bear of a man whose sons had died in the last raid. "Her father's men killed 3 of our own." "Did she hold the blade?" Gunnhild challenged, moving to stand between the elders and the girl. She could feel the child's gaze on her back, could sense her desperate hope. "Did these hands draw our blood?" She gestured to the tiny bound fingers. Thorgrim stepped forward, his authority a palpable force. "The gods have spoken, woman. Would you place your judgment above theirs? Above the safety of your people?" Gunnhild met his gaze steadily. "I place my judgment nowhere, elder. I only ask if we have read the signs correctly. Perhaps—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Perhaps the gods sent her, not for death, but as a test of our mercy." A murmur ran through the gathered elders. Doubt flickered in some eyes, hardened to resolve in others. Jorunn, the old woman, studied Gunnhild with an unreadable expression. "You risk much, Thorvald's widow," Thorgrim said quietly. "Your position here is already precarious." The threat was clear, but Gunnhild found she didn't care. Something deeper than fear drove her now. She turned and drew her belt knife, moving toward the bound child. "Stop her!" Thorgrim commanded, but his voice held a note of uncertainty that gave the others pause. "I claim guest right for this child," Gunnhild said, the ancient law coming to her lips. "Until the full council can be gathered to decide her fate. This is my right as a free woman of this clan." It was a desperate gamble. Guest right was sacred, even for enemies, though rarely invoked for prisoners. But Gunnhild had calculated correctly. None moved to stop her as she cut the ropes binding the girl. The child's legs buckled as she was freed, and Gunnhild caught her small body against her side. Up close, she could see bruises on the girl's arms, the bluish tint of her lips from cold. "You will answer for this interference, Gunnhild," Thorgrim said, his voice low with suppressed rage. "When the raids come, when the gods turn their faces from us, you will bear the weight of every death." Gunnhild met his gaze. "If that is my fate, I accept it," she said simply. Then to the child, "Can you walk?" The girl nodded, her eyes enormous in her thin face. "Then come with me," Gunnhild whispered. "You will not die here." Together they left the clearing, the elders' burning eyes on their backs. Gunnhild felt a curious lightness despite the gravity of what she'd done. For the first time since Thorvald's death, she had acted not from duty or routine, but from the core of who she truly was. The child stumbled beside her, trying to match Gunnhild's long strides. Without a word, the widow stopped and lifted her, surprised at how little the girl weighed. She settled the child against her hip and continued through the darkening woods toward her cabin at the village edge. "What is your name?" Gunnhild asked softly. For a long moment she thought the girl wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice thin as a winter stream, "Eira, Eira Thransdottir." "Well, Eira Thransdottir," Gunnhild replied, adjusting her hold as they approached her door, "I am Gunnhild, and tonight you are under my protection." The girl's arms tightened around her neck, the first voluntary movement she'd made. It was answer enough. Inside, Gunnhild's cabin welcomed them with shadows and lingering warmth from the morning's fire. She set Eira down on the fur-covered bench and moved quickly to rekindle the flames. The familiar tasks, laying kindling, striking flint, coaxing the spark to life, helped settle her racing thoughts. What had she done? Challenged the elders, defied tradition, possibly endangered the entire village if the gods truly demanded blood. When the fire caught, painting the cabin's interior with amber light, she turned to study her unexpected guest. Eira sat perfectly still, her posture tense as a drawn bow. Those blue eyes, so like the summer sky, watched Gunnhild's every movement. "Are you hungry?" Gunnhild asked, moving to the storage chest where she kept her modest provisions. The girl didn't respond, but her gaze followed Gunnhild's hands as she removed a loaf of dark bread and a small crock of preserved fish. Understanding the silent answer, Gunnhild cut a generous portion and offered it on a wooden plate. Eira hesitated, then reached for the food with trembling fingers. She ate with the careful deliberation of one accustomed to hunger, each bite measured and savored. "Your wrists need tending," Gunnhild observed, gesturing to the raw skin where the ropes had bitten. "May I?" Again that wary silence, then a small nod. Gunnhild gathered her supplies, clean linen, a pot of salve made from pine resin and herbs, and knelt before the child. As she gently cleaned the wounds, she spoke in a low, steady voice. "I know you are afraid. You have every right to be. But while you are here, no harm will come to you." She wrapped the first wrist carefully. "I cannot promise what tomorrow will bring. The council is divided. But tonight you are safe." "Why?" The word was so quiet Gunnhild almost missed it. She looked up, meeting those sky-blue eyes. "Why did I help you?" Eira nodded. Gunnhild's hands stilled on the bandage. How could she explain what she herself didn't fully understand? The compulsion that had driven her to interfere, the certainty that to walk away would have destroyed something essential within her. "Because it was right," she said finally. "Because no child should die for the fears of old men." "But I'm your enemy," Eira said, touching the bone pendant at her throat with her free hand. "My father says your people are oath-breakers and thieves." "And our people say the same of yours," Gunnhild replied with a small, sad smile. "Yet here we sit, sharing bread, neither of us breaking oaths or stealing." A flicker of something, not quite trust, but perhaps its distant cousin, crossed the girl's face. She allowed Gunnhild to finish bandaging her second wrist without further comment. Later, as the night deepened around the cabin, Gunnhild arranged sleeping furs near the fire for her guest. Eira curled into them like a young fox, her body exhausted beyond fear. Within moments, her breathing slowed into the deep rhythm of sleep. Gunnhild sat at her loom, fingers working the shuttle mechanically while her mind raced. Come morning, the entire village would know what she had done. Thorgrim would call a council meeting. She might face banishment, or worse. The thought should have terrified her, yet instead she felt an odd serenity. Whatever came, she had remained true to herself. She glanced at the sleeping child. So small to bear such weight of hatred and history. In slumber, Eira's face had softened, the wariness replaced by the innocence that was her birthright. Gunnhild remembered Thorvald's words on the morning he'd left for his final battle. "We fight so that our children may know peace." "What peace can come from children's blood, my love?" she whispered to his memory. What future can we build on such a foundation? The night offered no answer but the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the child she had saved, perhaps at the cost of everything else she possessed. Dawn arrived with a hesitant knock at Gunnhild's door. She rose from where she'd finally dozed in her chair, glancing at Eira, who still slept deeply, and moved quietly to answer. Brenna stood outside, her face drawn with worry. "The village is in uproar," she said without preamble. "Thorgrim has called a council meeting at midday, they say." Her eyes darted past Gunnhild to the sleeping form by the fire. "They say you interrupted a sacrifice, that you've brought the child here." "It's true," Gunnhild admitted, stepping outside and pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "Have you lost your mind?" Brenna hissed, genuine fear in her eyes. "Thorgrim is calling it treason. Sten wants you banished before the next snow." "And what do you think?" Gunnhild asked quietly. Brenna's weathered face softened slightly. "I think you've always had more courage than sense, Gunnhild Vargdottir. But—" she glanced toward the cabin. "A child sacrifice? I had not thought our people would return to such ways." "Desperate times breed desperate measures," Gunnhild said, "but that doesn't make them right." "Be that as it may," Brenna replied, "you've made powerful enemies. Thorgrim sent a messenger to Ulfric's clan at first light." Gunnhild's blood chilled. "He what?" "He claims the girl must be returned to her people, that keeping her will only provoke more raids. But all know what fate awaits her if Ulfric learns she was meant for sacrifice. He'll use it as reason to attack us with his full force. So Thorgrim would hand her to certain death either way, Gunnhild said bitterly. The sacrifice merely changes form. Brenna gripped Gunnhild's arm. Listen to me. You have few allies, but you are not without support.
Jorunn spoke against the sacrifice after you left. Some of the younger warriors, those who have seen enough bloodshed in recent years, question whether more death will bring peace. Hope flickered briefly in Gunnhild's chest. What can I do? Come to the council, speak your case, and, Brenna hesitated, prepare for the worst. If banishment is declared, you must be ready to leave quickly. After Brenna departed, Gunnhild stood in the pale morning light, weighing her options. Fleeing before the council met would confirm her guilt in the village's eyes. Staying meant facing judgment, possibly death, if Thorgrim convinced enough elders that she had committed sacrilege. And what of Eira? The girl couldn't remain in the village without protection, yet taking her into the winter wilderness was a death sentence of another kind. When she re-entered the cabin, she found Eira awake, sitting up in her nest of furs, watching the door with wary eyes. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" the child asked, her voice steadier than it had been the night before. Gunnhild nodded, seeing no point in shielding her from the truth. "Yes, but not yet. We have until midday." "Will you give me to them?" There was no accusation in the question, only the resigned curiosity of a child who had never expected mercy to last. The question pierced Gunnhild's heart. "No," she said firmly. "I claimed guest right for you. In the eyes of our laws and gods, you are under my protection until the matter is properly decided." "But they'll hurt you because of me." Eira's fingers twisted in the sleeping furs. "My father says your people are weak because you care too much of each other." "Is that weakness?" Gunnhild asked, moving to stoke the fire. "To value life?" Eira considered this, her young face solemn. "My mother died when I was small. Father said it was because she was weak. He said I must be stronger." "And are you?" Gunnhild asked gently. The girl's chin lifted slightly, the same proud gesture Gunnhild had noticed at the sacrifice. "I did not cry when they caught me, or when they tied me to the post. I was going to be brave when they—" She swallowed hard. "That is strength indeed," Gunnhild said, kneeling beside her. "But there are many kinds of strength, Eira. Some is here." She touched the girl's arm. "And some is here." She tapped her own chest, over her heart. "My father says heart strength is for women and thralls." "Then your father knows only half the truth," Gunnhild replied. "The strongest warriors I've known, including my husband, had both." She rose and moved to her storage chest, removing a clean linen shift that would serve as a makeshift dress for the child. "Come, let's get you washed and dressed properly. If we are to face the council, we should do so with dignity." As she helped Eira wash with warmed water from the cooking pot, Gunnhild noticed more bruises beneath the dirt, older marks that had nothing to do with her capture. Her jaw tightened, but she made no comment. Each clan had its ways, and she had no right to judge another's child-rearing, even as every instinct rebelled at the evidence before her. The morning passed too quickly. Gunnhild fed them both, then spent time combing the tangles from Eira's short blonde hair. The act of care seemed to bridge something between them. By the time she finished, the girl leaned slightly into her touch, some of the wariness melting from her posture. "What will happen at the council?" Eira asked, as Gunnhild braided a small section of hair at her temple, a mark of protected status among their people, though she doubted the gesture would be honored. "They will ask many questions," Gunnhild explained, tying off the braid with a thread. "About you, about why I interfered. They will decide what happens next."
"Will they kill me anyway?" The blunt question made Gunnhild's hands still.
"I will not allow that," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Whatever else happens today, Eira, I swear by all I hold sacred that you will not die by their hand." The girl turned, studying Gunnhild's face with an intensity beyond her years. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, for she nodded once solemnly. "I believe you," she said simply. The words, so unexpected, sent a wave of emotion through Gunnhild's chest. This child, this enemy-born, frightened, resilient child, had given her trust. It felt like a gift more precious than gold. As midday approached, the sounds of the gathering council drifted through the village, the low hum of voices, the occasional raised argument. Gunnhild donned her best tunic and secured her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Around her shoulders she placed Thorvald's wolf pelt, a reminder of his strength, and perhaps a silent appeal to his memory for protection. "Are you ready?" she asked Eira, who stood by the door in the too large shift, her bone pendant resting against the pale linen. "Yes," the girl said, though her small hand crept into Gunnhild's as they stepped into the winter sunlight. Together they walked toward the great hall where the council gathered, aware of the eyes that followed their progress. Some hostile, others merely curious, a few showing flickers of sympathy quickly masked. Gunnhild kept her chin high, and her pace measured, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a war drum. The great hall stood at the village center, its carved pillars depicting the gods and heroes of their people. Inside, firelight cast long shadows across the gathered faces of the council members and village elders. At the head of the assembly sat Thorgrim, his white hair gleaming in the dim light, his pale eyes cold as he watched them enter. "Gunnhild Vargdottir," he intoned, his voice carrying to the rafters. "You come before this council accused of interfering with a sacred rite, of defying the will of the gods, and of harboring an enemy of our people. How do you answer these charges?" Gunnhild stepped forward, gently disengaging Eira's hand, but keeping the child close beside her. The hall fell silent, all eyes upon them. "I answer that I acted according to my conscience and the true laws of our people," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We have always honored strength, courage, and honor above all else. Where is the honor in sacrificing a child? What courage does it take to spill innocent blood?" A murmur ran through the assembly. Thorgrim's eyes narrowed. "You question the wisdom of the council, the reading of the omens?" His voice was dangerously soft. "I question whether fear has clouded our judgment," Gunnhild countered. "Our ancestors fought their enemies face to face, not through the blood of their children. The child is enemy-born," called Sten from his place near the fire. "Her father's raids have cost us lives and food stores we cannot spare." "And what of her?" Gunnhild gestured to Eira, who stood remarkably still beside her. "Has she raised a weapon against us? Has she stolen our food? Or is her only crime the blood that runs in her veins, something she no more chose than the color of her eyes?" "The gods demand sacrifice in times of need," Thorgrim said, his fingers tightening on his carved staff. "The signs were clear." "Were they?" Gunnhild challenged. "Or did we see what we wished to see? What easier way to appease our fear than to blame a child who cannot defend herself?" The door to the great hall swung open, admitting a gust of cold air and a figure whose presence sent a ripple of tension through the assembly.
Gunnhild turned, her body instinctively moving to shield Eira. Ulfric Gudmundsson stood in the doorway, his dark form silhouetted against the winter light. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and grim, his black hair pulled back in a severe knot, his pale face marked by old pock scars. The deep scar that bisected the right side of his face twisted his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. Behind him stood 4 warriors, hands resting on their weapons. "I was told," he said, his voice a low growl, "that you had something of mine." Thorgrim rose, his posture stiff with barely concealed hostility. "Ulfric Gudmundsson, you come armed into our hall?" "I come as I am," Ulfric replied, stepping further into the room. His cold gray eyes scanned the assembly until they landed on Eira. Something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, certainly, but Gunnhild saw no relief, no fatherly concern, only calculation. "So it's true," he said. "The child lives." Eira had gone rigid beside Gunnhild, her small body trembling almost imperceptibly. Gunnhild placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "She is under my protection," Gunnhild said, addressing Ulfric directly, "by the right of guest law." Ulfric's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Guest law? For a prisoner?" He turned to Thorgrim. "Your women have grown bold in their interpretations of our ways, it seems." "Gunnhild Vargdottir's actions are her own," Thorgrim replied stiffly. "The council was in the process of determining an appropriate response when you arrived." "There is nothing to determine," Ulfric said, his voice hardening. "The child is mine by blood and right. I have come to claim her." "And what fate awaits her if you do?" Gunnhild asked, unable to contain herself. "Will you value her life more than these people were prepared to?" A dangerous silence fell over the hall. Ulfric's eyes narrowed as he studied Gunnhild more carefully. "You are Thorvald's widow," he said after a moment. "I remember you now. He was a worthy opponent. It's a shame he fell to Saxon blades rather than mine." Gunnhild felt the familiar ache of loss, but kept her face impassive. "He spoke of you as well," she replied coolly, "though not in terms I should repeat in this hall." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through some of the younger warriors. Ulfric's mouth tightened. "The child," he said, his patience clearly waning. "Now." Thorgrim cleared his throat. "There is the matter of recompense," he said carefully. "Your people have raided our hunting grounds twice in the past moon. Stores have been taken, men killed." "And my daughter was taken in return," Ulfric countered. "I would say the blood price has been paid." "Not taken," Gunnhild interjected. "Found wandering alone near the boundary stones, half frozen and hungry. It was a lie, but she delivered it without hesitation. We gave her shelter and food, the same as we would any lost child." Ulfric's eyes flicked to Eira. "Is this true?" he demanded. The girl's face had gone blank, a mask that reminded Gunnhild painfully of how young children learn to hide from adult rage. For a heartbeat, she feared Eira would contradict her story out of ingrained obedience to her father. But Eira surprised her. "Yes," she said, her voice small but clear. "I was looking for Knut, my dog. He ran away 3 days ago." It was such a perfect, childlike detail that Gunnhild had to suppress a smile. Clever girl. Doubt flickered across Ulfric's features.
You expect me to believe she wandered miles from our settlement alone in winter? Children are often more resourceful than we give them credit for, said Jørund, speaking for the first time from her place near the fire. The old woman's rheumy eyes studied Eira with an intensity that made Gunnhild uneasy, especially when motivated by love. Be that as it may, Ulfric said after a moment, she returns with me today. No. The word left Gunnhild's lips before she could consider its wisdom. The hall went deathly quiet. Ulfric's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. You dare to keep my blood from me, woman? I dare to question what becomes of her if she returns, Gunnhild replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The marks on her body tell their own story, Ulfric Gudmundsson. His face darkened. You overstep, widow. How I discipline my household is not your concern. It became my concern when I gave her my protection, Gunnhild countered. She turned to face the council. I invoke the right of fostering. Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the hall. Fostering between allied families was common enough, but between enemies? Unheard of. Madness, muttered Sten. Impossible, said another elder. Interesting, said Jørund, almost to herself. Thorgrim rapped his staff against the floor for silence. Explain yourself, Gunnhild, he commanded. She drew a deep breath. Our people face hard times. Raids, poor harvests, sickness. The same troubles plague Ulfric's clan. She gestured to the girl beside her. Perhaps the gods did send us a sign, but not the one we thought. Not a sacrifice, but a bridge. What nonsense is this? Ulfric growled. Peace, Gunnhild said simply. A fostering between our clans. Eira lives here, learns our ways, creates bonds between us. When she comes of age, she returns to her people with knowledge that could end generations of raiding and death. You suggest I give my daughter to my enemies? Ulfric's voice was incredulous. I suggest you give her a chance at a life beyond fear, Gunnhild replied quietly. And your people a chance at a future beyond endless blood feuds. The hall erupted in voices, some supportive, others outraged. Thorgrim struggled to restore order, while Ulfric's face darkened with fury. Enough, he roared finally. This is a trick, nothing more. You sought a sacrifice, and when your courage failed, you concocted this tale of fostering and peace. He turned to Thorgrim. Give me the child, or there will be war between us before the next full moon. The threat hung in the air, heavy as storm clouds. Gunnhild felt Eira press against her side, small fingers clutching at her tunic. There is another way to settle this, came a voice from near the hearth. Jørund rose slowly, leaning heavily on her staff. Though her body was bent with age, her eyes were sharp as she surveyed the assembly. The old way, she continued, let the child choose. Choose? Ulfric scoffed. She is 8 winters old, and female besides. What does she know of such matters? More than you might think, Jørund replied, her withered face creasing in a smile that held little warmth. Children see with clear eyes, Ulfric Gudmundsson. They know where safety lies. This is absurd, he snarled. She is mine by blood right. And yet, Jørund said, her voice gaining strength, she stands closer to the blacksmith's widow than to you, her father. Curious, is it not? All eyes turned to Eira,
who indeed had pressed herself against Gunnhild's side, as far from Ulfric as possible, while still remaining in view. "The child chooses," Joran announced, striking her staff against the packed earth floor, "as is her right under the old laws. Speak, girl, with whom do you wish to remain?" Eira's eyes widened, darting between Ulfric's thunderous face and Gunnhild's concerned one. The hall fell silent, waiting. She began, her voice barely audible. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I want to stay with Gunnhild." The words hung in the air like frost crystals, delicate and sharp. Ulfric's face contorted with rage. "This is a farce," he spat. "She has been corrupted by your influence, turned against her own blood." "Or perhaps," Joran said quietly, "she simply chooses the hand that heals over the one that strikes." Ulfric's hand flew to his sword hilt.
"You accuse me?"
"We accuse you of nothing," Thorgrim interjected hastily, clearly anxious to prevent bloodshed in the sacred hall. "But the child has spoken, and the old law is clear." "I do not recognize your laws," Ulfric growled. "I came in peace to reclaim what is mine. If you refuse, there will be consequences." Gunnhild stepped forward, placing herself more fully between Eira and her father. "Would you truly start a war over one child?" she asked. "A daughter you have marked more with bruises than with love?" Ulfric's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You know nothing of my ways, widow." "I know the difference between discipline and cruelty," she replied steadily, "as does she." For a long moment the hall was silent, but for the crackling of the hearth fire. Ulfric's gaze moved from Gunnhild to Eira, then to the assembled council. Calculation replaced some of the rage in his expression. "Perhaps," he said finally, his voice deceptively calm, "there is wisdom in the old woman's suggestion after all. A fostering." His lips curved in what might have been a smile, though it did not reach his cold eyes. "But not without conditions." Thorgrim leaned forward on his seat. "What conditions?" "First, an end to all raids on my hunting grounds," Ulfric said. "Second, trading rights at your spring market." "And in return?" Thorgrim asked warily. "In return, I allow the girl to remain here until she bleeds. After that, she returns to take her place among our women." Ulfric's gaze settled on Gunnhild. "And I want your word, widow of Thorvald, that you will not poison her mind against her people." Gunnhild felt Eira's small hand slip into hers, squeezing with surprising strength. "I will teach her truth," Gunnhild replied carefully, "about both our peoples, the good and the ill. Would you have me do less?" A muscle twitched in Ulfric's jaw, but he nodded curtly. "So be it, but know this." His voice dropped to a menacing growl. "If harm comes to her while she is in your care, I will hold you personally responsible. And there will be no counsel, no debate, no mercy." "I understand," Gunnhild said simply. Thorgrim looked between them, then to the assembled elders. "Is the council in agreement with these terms?" A murmur of assent rose from most quarters, though Sten and a few others remained stonily silent. "Then it is decided," Thorgrim announced. "Eira Thran's daughter remains in the care of Gunnhild Vargdaughter until she reaches womanhood, as a foster child and symbol of peace between our clans." Ulfric turned without another word and strode from the hall, his warriors falling in behind him. The heavy door swung shut with a finality that seemed to release a collective breath from the assembly. Gunnhild knelt beside Eira, searching the girl's face. "Are you certain this is what you want?" she asked softly. "He is still your father?" Eira's blue eyes were solemn as she nodded. "He gave me to the raiders," she whispered, so quietly that only Gunnhild could hear. "He told them to take me, said I was a burden, not strong enough." The revelation struck Gunnhild like a physical blow. Not captured then, given away, discarded like an unwanted tool. "Well," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "he was wrong about that. You are the strongest person in this room, Eira Thran's daughter." A ghost of a smile touched the girl's lips. "Stronger than you?" "Much stronger," Gunnhild assured her, rising and taking her hand again. "Now, shall we go home? I think we've had enough excitement for one day." As they walked from the hall into the winter sunshine, Gunnhild was acutely aware of the watching eyes, the whispers that followed them. Some gazes held admiration, others suspicion or outright hostility. Thorgrim's decision had satisfied no one completely, neither those who believed the sacrifice necessary, nor those who saw Eira as an enemy regardless of her age.
The path ahead would not be easy. But as Eira's small hand remained trustingly in hers, Gunnhild felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before Thorvald's death. Whatever came, this had been the right choice, the only choice her heart could have made. The winter days that followed settled into a rhythm unlike any Gunnhild had known. Having Eira in her home transformed the small cabin from a place of solitary grief to one of shared meals, quiet conversations, and, gradually, moments of unexpected joy. The girl was solemn by nature, watchful and quick to notice shifts in mood or tone. She followed Gunnhild like a shadow at first, as if afraid that straying too far might result in abandonment. But as days stretched into weeks, her confidence grew. She began to explore the cabin, examining Gunnhild's few treasured possessions with careful fingers. The carved wooden box that had been a wedding gift, the iron amulet Thorvald had forged for her, the small loom where Gunnhild wove simple bands and trims. "Did you make this?" she asked one evening, touching a woven wall hanging that depicted a ship sailing beneath a starry sky. "Yes," Gunnhild replied, looking up from the stew she stirred. "Before you came. The winter nights are long, and hands need occupation." "It's beautiful," Eira said, her fingers tracing the embroidered stars. Could you teach me?" The hesitant question, the first thing Eira had asked for herself, warmed Gunnhild's heart. "Of course. We'll start tomorrow." True to her word, Gunnhild began teaching Eira the basics of weaving the following day. The girl proved to have nimble fingers and a good eye for patterns, though her first attempts were understandably clumsy. "I'm ruining it," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "You're learning," Gunnhild corrected gently. "No one creates beauty without first creating many mistakes." Eira glanced up, doubt clear in her eyes. "My father says mistakes are weakness."
"Your father," Gunnhild said carefully, "is entitled to his opinion. But in this house, mistakes are how we grow stronger." The subtle rebellion against Ulfric's authority felt dangerous, yet necessary. Gunnhild had promised not to poison the girl against her people, but that didn't mean she would reinforce harmful beliefs. As Eira's confidence grew, so did her willingness to venture beyond the cabin. Initially, the other children kept their distance, viewing her with the wariness their parents had taught them. Gunnhild watched from the forge as Eira stood at the edge of their games, her posture a mixture of longing and resignation. "Give them time," she told the girl that evening as they shared a simple meal.
Children are quick to judge, but also quick to forgive. "What if they never accept me?" Eira asked, pushing a piece of turnip around her bowl. "Then they lose the chance to know someone remarkable," Gunnhild replied simply. A week later, she looked up from her work to see Eira engaged in a spirited game of knucklebones with Brenna's daughter and 2 other children. The sight brought an unexpected lump to her throat. Not everyone in the village shared this gradual warming, however. Sten and his supporters made their disapproval clear, turning away when Gunnhild and Eira passed, refusing to trade with them at the small village market. Thorgrim maintained a cold neutrality, acknowledging them with the minimum courtesy his position required. "They blame us for the continuing hardships," Brenna explained one day as they worked side by side, Gunnhild at her forge and Brenna stretching hides nearby. "The hunting remains poor, and there are whispers of sickness in the northern settlements." "And they think this is because we spared one child's life?" Gunnhild asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Brenna shrugged. "Fear needs a target, my friend. Better you than a ghost or an unseen god." The winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that blanketed the village and surrounding forests. Food stores dwindled faster than anticipated, leading to reduced rations and growing anxiety. Gunnhild shared what she had with Eira, sometimes going hungry herself to ensure the girl had enough to sustain her growing body. One evening, as they huddled near the fire while wind howled outside, Eira asked the question Gunnhild had been dreading. "Was Thorgrim right? Did the gods want my blood?" Gunnhild set aside her mending, choosing her words with care. "I don't believe the gods thirst for children's blood," she said finally. "I believe they value courage and honor and strength, the very qualities you've shown." "But what if the village suffers because I lived?" Eira's eyes reflected the firelight, wide and troubled. "What if people die?" "People die every winter," Gunnhild said gently. "It is the way of things. But we don't blame the snow or the darkness. We endure. We help each other. We remember that spring always returns." Eira considered this, then nodded slowly. "In my father's village, they say that to die well is the only thing that matters." "And what do you think?" Gunnhild asked. The girl was silent for a long moment. I think how you live matters more." Gunnhild smiled. "I think so too." The harshest part of winter passed, and with early spring came the first signs of renewal. Green shoots pushed through melting snow, and hunting parties returned with more game. The village's mood lightened, though tension still simmered beneath the surface. Eira continued to thrive under Gunnhild's care. Her thin frame filled out, her cheeks gained healthy color, and she grew nearly a hand's width in height. More significantly, she began to smile, tentatively at first, then with increasing frequency. The sound of her laughter, rare but precious, filled the cabin with a warmth no fire could match. Yet, as the spring equinox approached, bringing with it the traditional gathering of nearby clans for trading and celebration, Gunnhild's anxiety grew. Ulfric would come, as would other leaders who had heard of the unusual fostering arrangement. Eira would be scrutinized, judged, perhaps even reclaimed if Ulfric decided the agreement no longer suited him. "Will I have to go with him?" asked Eira the night before the gathering, her voice small in the darkness of their shared sleeping area. Gunnhild reached across the space between their pallets, finding the girl's hand. "No," she said firmly. "Our agreement stands until you come of age. But I will have to see him." "Yes, and be respectful, as a daughter should." Gunnhild squeezed the small hand in hers. "Can you do that?"
A long silence, then, "For you I can." The simple declaration of loyalty brought tears to Gunnhild's eyes. "Sleep now," she whispered. "Tomorrow will bring what it brings, and we will face it together." The spring gathering transformed Skildheim from a quiet settlement to a bustling hub of activity. Traders set up stalls, displaying goods from distant lands. Warriors competed in friendly contests of strength and skill. Children darted between the legs of adults, shrieking with excitement at the unusual sights and sounds. Gunnhild and Eira moved through the crowd together, the girl staying close to her foster mother's side. They had both dressed with care, Gunnhild in her best blue tunic with tablet-woven trim. Eira in a new dress Gunnhild had made from traded wool, dyed a soft green that matched the spring leaves. "Gunnhild Vargdottir!" The voice came from behind them, familiar and unwelcome. Gunnhild turned, placing a protective hand on Eira's shoulder. "Ulfric," she acknowledged with a nod. "The spring brings you well, I trust?" He looked much as he had at their last meeting, though perhaps the lines around his eyes had deepened. His cold gaze moved from Gunnhild to Eira, assessing. "You've grown, daughter," he said, his tone neutral. Eira dipped her head respectfully. "Father," she murmured. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when one of Ulfric's warriors approached with news of a trading dispute that required his attention. With a curt nod to Gunnhild and a last lingering look at Eira, he departed. "You did well," Gunnhild told Eira, feeling the girl's shoulders relax beneath her hand. "He didn't seem angry," Eira observed, a note of surprise in her voice. "Perhaps he sees that you are thriving," Gunnhild suggested, though she doubted Ulfric's capacity for such paternal satisfaction. More likely, he had other concerns that took precedence over a daughter he had once been willing to discard. The day progressed without further incident. Eira gradually relaxed enough to join some of the children's games, while Gunnhild traded her metalwork for supplies they would need in the coming months. The atmosphere was festive, with mead flowing freely and musicians playing traditional songs that had people clapping and dancing. As evening approached, the central bonfire was lit, and people gathered for the feast that marked the equinox celebration. Gunnhild and Eira found places near Brenna and her family, grateful for the buffer of friendly faces. Thorgrim rose to make the traditional welcoming speech, his white hair gleaming in the firelight as he raised his arms for silence. "Welcome, friends and allies," he began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "We celebrate another winter survived, another spring returned. The gods have tested us, as they always do, but we endure." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. "This past year has brought changes," Thorgrim continued, his pale eyes sweeping the crowd. "New alliances, new understandings." His gaze settled briefly on Gunnhild and Eira before moving on. "And with change comes opportunity. The opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, more united." It was a diplomatic speech, carefully avoiding any direct reference to the controversies that had divided the village. Gunnhild felt herself relaxing slightly. Perhaps the evening would pass peacefully after all. But as the feast progressed, and the mead flowed more freely, tensions that had simmered beneath the surface began to rise. Sten, his face flushed with drink, stood suddenly, raising his horn. "To the gods!" he called, his voice slurred but carrying. "Who protect us despite those who would deny them their due." His supporters cheered, while others shifted uncomfortably. Gunnhild felt Eira press closer to her side. "Perhaps we should return to the cabin," she murmured to the girl. But before they could rise, Ulfric stood from his place near the head of the gathering. The firelight cast dramatic shadows across his scarred face as he surveyed the crowd. "I hear," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise, "that there has been discord in Skjoldheim. Discord over my daughter." A hush fell over the assembly. All eyes turned toward Gunnhild and Eira. "Some believe she should have been sacrificed to appease your gods," Ulfric continued, his tone neutral but his eyes hard. "Others defended her right to live. An interesting division for a people who pride themselves on unity." "Our internal matters are not your concern, Ulfric," Thorgrim said, rising to his feet. "But they are," Ulfric countered smoothly, "when they involve my blood." He turned to face Gunnhild directly. "Stand, widow of Thorvald. Bring my daughter forward." Gunnhild hesitated, then rose slowly, keeping Eira close to her side as they moved into the open space near the fire. The girl's face was pale but composed, her chin lifted in that now familiar gesture of defiance. "Look at her," commanded the assembly.
Does she look like a sacrifice, or does she look like what she is, the future? Confused murmurs ran through the crowd. This was not the confrontation anyone had expected. "Our peoples have raided and killed each other for generations," Ulfric continued. "To what end? Fewer warriors each year, hungry winters, grieving mothers." His gaze swept the assembly. "Perhaps the gods did send a sign when they delivered my daughter into your hands. Not a demand for blood, but an opportunity for something new." Gunnhild stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Was this the same man who had threatened war over the child just months ago? "I propose an extension of our current agreement," Ulfric announced. "Not just fostering, but a formal alliance between our clans. Shared hunting grounds, combined raids against common enemies, protection for both our peoples." The crowd erupted in voices, some supportive, others suspicious or outright hostile. Thorgrim struggled to restore order, his face a mask of calculation as he weighed the political implications of Ulfric's unexpected offer. "And what guarantee do we have that this is not a trick?" called Sten above the din. "That you won't turn on us once we've lowered our guard?" Ulfric's scarred mouth twisted. "The same guarantee you have that the sun will rise tomorrow. None at all. But consider this. I could have brought my full force against you this winter when you were weak and hungry. I did not. Because of the child, someone else called. You feared for her safety." "Perhaps," Ulfric acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head. "Or perhaps I saw an opportunity for something greater than endless blood feuds." He turned to Gunnhild, his expression unreadable. "Your courage in defending my daughter impressed me, widow. It is not a quality I expected to find among your people." The backhanded compliment might have angered Gunnhild once, but now she recognized it for what it was, an attempt to save face while still moving toward peace. "Courage takes many forms, Ulfric Gudmundsson," she replied evenly, "as does wisdom." A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, crossed his scarred features before he turned back to address Thorgrim. "Consider my offer, elder. We will remain until the full moon for your answer." With that, he returned to his seat, leaving a wake of excited conversation behind him. Gunnhild guided Eira back to their place, her mind racing with the implications of what had just occurred. Did he mean it?
Eira whispered, her eyes wide. "About peace?" Gunnhild considered her answer carefully. "Your father is a practical man," she said finally. "If peace serves his interests better than war, then yes, I believe he meant it." "Because of me?" The question held a note of wonder. "Because of what you represent," Gunnhild corrected gently. "A bridge between old enemies, a new beginning." As the evening progressed, various village members approached Gunnhild, some offering congratulations, others expressing skepticism about Ulfric's motives. Through it all, she maintained a diplomatic neutrality, neither celebrating a victory nor dismissing the potential for genuine change. When they finally returned to their cabin, Eira was nearly asleep on her feet, exhausted by the day's emotions and activities. As Gunnhild helped her prepare for bed, the girl looked up with solemn eyes. "If there's peace," she said, "will I still stay with you, or will I have to go back to him?" The question pierced Gunnhild's heart. She had tried not to think too far ahead, knowing that their time together was always meant to be temporary. The fostering agreement specified that Eira would return to her people when she reached womanhood, typically around 12 or 13 winters. "The agreement stands as before," she said, smoothing Eira's hair back from her forehead. "You remain with me until you come of age. And then?" Gunnhild sighed. "Then you return to your father's people, as agreed. But as a valued member of the clan, not as—" She hesitated, unwilling to voice the darker possibilities that had haunted her. "Not as a burden," Eira finished for her, her voice small but steady. "Never that," Gunnhild said firmly. "You will return as someone who has built bridges between enemies. There is no greater honor." Eira nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "I wish I could stay with you forever," she whispered, as sleep began to claim her. "I know, little one," Gunnhild murmured, her throat tight with emotion. "I wish that too." The days that followed were filled with diplomatic discussions between Thorgrim's council and Ulfric's representatives. Gunnhild was not directly involved, but Brenna kept her informed of the negotiations' progress. "They're actually considering it," Brenna reported, her voice hushed with amazement. "A formal alliance. Even Sten has begun to see the advantages." "And Thorgrim?" Gunnhild asked. "Cautious, as always, but not opposed." Brenna glanced toward where Eira was helping her daughter collect early spring herbs. "It's remarkable, isn't it? All this change because of one child." "One child and a moment's courage," Gunnhild corrected softly. On the night of the full moon, the village gathered once more for the formal response to Ulfric's proposal. Gunnhild and Eira sat among the villagers, no longer separated as they had been at the feast. Thorgrim stood before the assembly, his white hair gleaming in the moonlight. Beside him stood Ulfric, his scarred face impassive as he awaited the council's decision. "After much deliberation," Thorgrim announced, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "the council has decided to accept Ulfric Gudmundsson's proposal of alliance between our clans."
A murmur ran through the crowd. Relief from some, resignation from others, cautious hope from many. "The details of this alliance will be formalized in the coming days," Thorgrim continued. "But let it be known that from this night forward, our peoples are no longer enemies, but allies against the common threats we face." Ulfric stepped forward, extending his arm to Thorgrim. The two leaders clasped forearms in the traditional gesture of agreement, sealing the pact before all witnesses. "Let this new beginning be marked," Ulfric said, his voice carrying across the assembly, "by acknowledging those who made it possible." His gaze found Gunnhild and Eira in the crowd. "Stand, daughter, and you, her guardian."
Gunnhild rose, helping Eira to her feet beside her. All eyes turned toward them. "My daughter lives because of this woman's courage," Ulfric stated, his tone matter-of-fact rather than emotional. "And our peoples may thrive because of that same courage. Let it be remembered." It was as close to public gratitude as a man like Ulfric could come, and Gunnhild acknowledged it with a respectful nod, her hand resting protectively on Eira's shoulder. The formal ceremony concluded with traditional oaths and the sharing of mead between the clan leaders. As the gathering dispersed into smaller groups for celebration, Ulfric approached Gunnhild and Eira. "You have done well by her," he said without preamble, his cold eyes assessing Eira's healthy appearance and straight posture. "She has done well by herself," Gunnhild replied. "She is stronger than anyone knew." A flicker of something, regret, acknowledgement, crossed Ulfric's face. "Perhaps," he conceded. He turned to Eira. "You will continue your fostering as agreed. Learn what you can from these people. When you return to us, you will bring valuable knowledge." "Yes, father," Eira replied, her voice steady, though Gunnhild could feel the tension in the small body beside her. Ulfric studied his daughter for a moment longer, then nodded once before turning away to rejoin his warriors. Gunnhild felt Eira's shoulders relax as he departed. "He didn't try to take me back," the girl whispered, wonder in her voice. "He sees your value now," Gunnhild said, choosing her words with care. "Not just as his daughter, but as a bridge between our peoples." As the celebration continued around them, Gunnhild found herself approached by villagers who had once avoided her, offering congratulations, sharing mead, even thanking her for her role in bringing about this unexpected peace. The sudden shift from outcast to honored member of the community was disorienting, but she accepted their goodwill with grace. Later, as she and Eira walked home beneath a sky brilliant with stars, the girl slipped her hand into Gunnhild's. "Are you happy?" Eira asked, her face tilted up to the night sky. Gunnhild considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "I am happy that you are safe, that our peoples may know peace, that lives will be spared because of what happened here." "But," Eira prompted, perceptive as always. Gunnhild smiled ruefully. "But I know that peace is as fragile as spring ice. It must be tended carefully, protected from those who prefer the old ways of hatred and fear." "Like my father?" "Like many," Gunnhild corrected gently. "Change is difficult, Eira. People cling to what they know, even when it causes pain." They reached their cabin, now truly home to both of them. Inside, the familiar comfort of their shared space welcomed them. The loom where Eira was learning to create simple patterns. The hearth where they cooked and talked. The sleeping pallets placed close together for warmth and companionship. As they prepared for sleep, Gunnhild found herself thinking of Thorvald, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with a gentler ache of remembrance. He would have approved of what she had done, she thought. He had always believed that true strength lay not in violence, but in the courage to choose a different path. "Gunnhild," Eira's voice came softly from her sleeping pallet. "Yes, little one? Thank you for saving me." The simple words spoken in the darkness brought tears to Gunnhild's eyes. "In truth," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "I think perhaps you saved me as well." The spring stars wheeled slowly overhead as Skjoldheim settled into slumber. In one small cabin, a woman who had defied tradition and a child who had survived against all odds slept peacefully,
Their futures intertwined in ways neither could have imagined on that cold winter night when fate had brought them together. The price of compassion had indeed been high. Suspicion, isolation, the weight of others' fear and judgment. But as the seasons turned and new bonds formed, both between individuals and between once hostile clans, it became clear that what had seemed like a sacrifice had in fact been an investment in something far more valuable than gold, weapons, or land. For in the end, the true strength of a Viking lay not in the sharpness of their blade or the fierceness of their battle cry, but in the courage to protect what was fragile, to choose mercy over vengeance, to build bridges where others would erect walls. And in that quiet courage, Gunnhild Vargdottir had found not just purpose, but a kind of peace she had never thought to know again.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.